If you sign those contracts today, you won't be buying 4 fleets of brand new vehicles. You'll be buying the same lie 4 different times. The words floated across the polished showroom with a calm certainty that felt almost out of place among the bright lights, expensive suits, and carefully rehearsed smiles. Every conversation stopped. Coffee cups hovered halfway to waiting hands. Even the sales managers exchanged confused glances before several of them laughed under their breath. At the center of the room stood Evelyn Brooks, the billionaire CEO whose logistics empire stretched across nearly every major interstate in America. She had built her company by trusting numbers instead of promises, and today she was prepared to approve one of the largest fleet purchases in her firm's history. More than 200 luxury work trucks waited outside beneath the warm Texas sun, each one polished until the chrome reflected the blue afternoon sky like a mirror. Representatives from 4 of the nation's most respected dealerships stood proudly beside digital presentations filled with glowing performance charts, warranty guarantees, and carefully crafted testimonials. Everything had been inspected. Everything had been certified. Everything appeared flawless. Then the quiet stranger spoke. Daniel Carter wasn't wearing an expensive suit. His faded blue work shirt carried a small stitched name above the pocket, and the sleeves had been rolled neatly to his forearms. His boots had seen years of honest work, and his hands carried the faint marks of someone who understood machines better than boardrooms. Most people assumed he was another maintenance contractor who had wandered into the executive meeting by mistake. One salesman smiled with open amusement. Another shook his head before whispering something that triggered a few more restrained chuckles. Daniel never reacted. His expression remained steady, almost peaceful, as though he had already accepted that truth often arrived after laughter. Sunlight poured through the towering glass walls, painting long golden reflections across the showroom floor, while the quiet hum of climate control blended with the faint scent of fresh leather and polished steel. Outside, rows of immaculate trucks stood like disciplined soldiers awaiting inspection, their flawless appearance hiding stories no glossy brochure would ever tell. Evelyn studied the stranger with careful eyes instead of immediate judgment. Years of negotiating billion-dollar deals had taught her that confidence often shouted, but real certainty usually whispered. "That's a serious accusation," she said evenly. "Do you have proof?" Daniel looked toward the vehicles instead of the executives. "Not yet," he answered softly, "but give me 3 minutes with the first truck, and I won't need an hour to explain the rest." One dealership president folded his arms and laughed louder this time. "Ma'am, this is exactly why professionals handle purchases like these. Anyone can invent a story." Another executive nodded confidently. "Every inspection has already been completed. Every record has been verified." Daniel simply met Evelyn's eyes. "Records can be rewritten," he said. "Metal remembers. Software remembers. Machines always remember." The room grew strangely still. No one could explain why those simple words felt heavier than the polished presentations displayed across the massive screens. Evelyn glanced toward the waiting contracts on the conference table, then back toward the quiet single father whose voice carried neither fear nor arrogance. Something deep inside her instincts, the same instincts that had built an empire from almost nothing, warned her not to dismiss him too quickly. She closed the leather folder containing the contracts. The sharp sound echoed through the silent showroom. 3 minutes, she said. "That's all you get." No one moved at first. The executives looked toward Evelyn Brooks, waiting for her to dismiss the stranger and continue the meeting that had already consumed weeks of planning. Instead, she simply nodded once. 3 minutes begin now." A few uneasy smiles disappeared as Daniel Carter walked toward the nearest pickup parked beneath the brilliant showroom lights. His pace was unhurried, almost familiar, like a man returning to a place he had visited 1,000 times before. He never reached for a tablet, never requested a maintenance file, and never asked anyone to explain the vehicle's history. He simply rested his fingertips lightly against the driver's side door before slowly walking around the truck. The room watched in puzzled silence. One dealership manager whispered, "What is he doing?" Another answered with a shrug, "Putting on a performance." Daniel crouched beside the front wheel for only a moment before standing again. His eyes traveled along the reflection running across the body panels. Then he leaned slightly closer to the rear quarter panel, studying something that nobody else appeared to notice. The faint scent of new paint mixed with fresh leather drifted through the cool air while sunlight poured through the towering glass walls, revealing every polished surface with almost painful clarity. To everyone else, the truck looked perfect. To Daniel, perfection often raised the first question. He opened the driver's door with quiet respect, careful not to leave so much as a fingerprint on the glossy finish. Instead of admiring the oversized touch screen or luxury trim, he placed one hand gently on the steering wheel and closed his eyes for a brief second. The gesture drew another wave of confused expressions. One salesman laughed softly. "Is he praying now?" Daniel ignored him completely. He adjusted the driver's seat forward exactly 2 inches, then back again. He listened. A barely noticeable mechanical click echoed beneath the leather upholstery. Tiny, ordinary, easy to dismiss. Daniel did not dismiss it. He looked toward the pedals, then under the dashboard without touching a single wire. Finally, he stepped back out and closed the door with deliberate care. "Interesting," he said quietly. One executive folded his arms. "Interesting is not evidence." Daniel nodded politely. "You are right." He walked to the front of the truck and knelt beside the grill. Running one finger just above a narrow seam, he smiled almost sadly. Neither is confidence. Evelyn had not interrupted once. She noticed something the others missed. Daniel never searched randomly. Every movement followed another with quiet purpose, as though he already knew where each answer was hiding. She had spent decades watching specialists in every industry, and true expertise always carried the same calm rhythm. It never rushed. It never needed applause. Daniel stood again and faced the group. "May I borrow the factory diagnostic tablet that came with this vehicle?" A dealership representative answered immediately. "There is no need. The inspection was completed yesterday." Daniel remained perfectly composed. "I did not ask about yesterday. I asked about today." The confidence in the room shifted almost imperceptibly. It was small, like the first breeze before a summer storm, but everyone felt it. Evelyn turned toward the nearest service technician. "Please bring the tablet." The technician hesitated only long enough to glance toward the dealership executives before quietly walking away. Daniel watched him leave, then looked back at the waiting trucks lined beneath the afternoon sun. "If the first one tells the truth," he said softly, "the other 3 already have." The service technician returned carrying the factory diagnostic tablet with both hands. His expression caught somewhere between routine professionalism and growing curiosity. He handed it to Evelyn Brooks instead of Daniel, following company protocol even as the atmosphere in the showroom continued to tighten. Evelyn accepted it without a word before extending it toward Daniel. Their eyes met for only a second, but it was long enough for her to recognize something unusual. He did not look excited. He did not look nervous. He looked like a man preparing to confirm something he had hoped he was wrong about. Daniel connected the tablet beneath the dashboard. A soft electronic chime echoed through the quiet room before lines of factory data slowly filled the screen. Several dealership executives immediately relaxed. Digital records had always been their strongest defense. One of them smiled confidently. "You will find exactly what our inspection reports showed." Daniel continued reading without responding. The faint glow from the display reflected across his calm face, while the low hum of the air conditioning blended with the distant sound of traffic beyond the glass walls. Every executive watched the screen. Every salesperson watched Daniel. Even the technicians standing near the service bay leaned forward without realizing they had stopped breathing normally. Daniel scrolled through the maintenance history once. Then he scrolled back. His finger stopped beside a software update completed just 12 days earlier. He selected another menu, then another. Finally, he looked up. "May I ask a simple question?" One dealership president crossed his arms. "Go ahead." Daniel turned the tablet so everyone could see the display. If this truck has never been involved in a major repair, why was the entire electronic control module reprogrammed after leaving the factory? Silence answered him for a heartbeat. Then one executive cleared his throat. Routine calibration. Daniel nodded politely. That would be possible if the calibration record matched the factory checksum. He tapped the screen gently. It does not. The smile disappeared from the executive's face. Another manager stepped forward. There are many reasons software may be updated. Absolutely, Daniel replied. But factory updates leave fingerprints. Independent rewrites leave different ones. He opened another diagnostic page. Rows of identification numbers appeared across the display. Someone rewrote the control module identification without replacing the original event log. The software remembers both versions. A quiet murmur spread across the room. The technicians exchanged uncertain glances. One of them quietly whispered, "I did not know that was possible." Daniel smiled kindly. Most people do not. That is why the system was designed that way. Evelyn stepped closer until she stood beside him. She carefully studied the numbers on the screen before looking toward the dealership representatives. Nobody volunteered an explanation this time. The confidence that had filled the showroom only minutes earlier seemed to dissolve beneath the bright afternoon light. Daniel disconnected the tablet and gently handed it back to the technician. "This does not prove everything," he said calmly. "It proves only one thing." He looked toward the line of gleaming trucks waiting outside. Somebody believed the software would never tell the truth. He paused before adding in the same steady voice, "Now let us find out whether that mistake was made once, or whether someone built an entire business around believing nobody would ever ask the right questions." No one argued when Evelyn Brooks ordered the remaining 3 trucks moved beside the first one. The request was calm, but it carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had spent her entire career making decisions that could change thousands of lives with a single signature. The showroom doors rolled open, allowing warm Texas sunlight to spill across the polished floor as technicians quietly repositioned each vehicle into a perfect line. Their reflections shimmered across the glass walls like identical images, almost daring anyone to believe they were exactly the same. Daniel Carter stood with his hands resting comfortably at his sides. He never celebrated the first discovery because experience had taught him that one mistake could be accidental. A pattern was something entirely different. One dealership executive forced a polite smile back onto his face. "Surely you are not suggesting 4 independent dealerships all made the same software error?" Daniel looked at him with quiet respect. "I'm not suggesting anything yet." He stepped toward the second truck. "I am simply asking the trucks to tell their own story." The service technician handed him the diagnostic tablet again. This time nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. The only sounds inside the massive showroom were the soft tapping of Daniel's fingertips against the screen, the distant hum of the ventilation system, and the occasional click of cooling metal beneath the hoods of the recently transported vehicles. Daniel connected to the second truck. The screen filled with another stream of factory information. He navigated through the menus with practiced patience before stopping at a page almost no customer would ever think to examine. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Interesting," he murmured. Evelyn stepped beside him. "The same thing." Daniel shook his head. "Not exactly." He turned the display so she could read it. The software was altered differently. Whoever performed this rewrite learned from the first one. One executive quickly interrupted. "That proves nothing. Updates evolve all the time." Daniel nodded. "They do." He gently tapped another field on the display. "Except whoever changed this overlooked the manufacturing timestamp hidden inside the backup registry. It still remembers the original sequence." Evelyn studied the numbers carefully. Even without technical training, she recognized the dates no longer matched the dealership's official inspection report. Her expression remained composed, but something inside her had already begun to shift. Daniel disconnected the tablet without saying another word and walked directly toward the third truck. There was no hesitation now. Every person in the showroom instinctively followed several steps behind him, almost like students watching an experienced teacher reveal a lesson none of them expected to learn. Sunlight reflected across the flawless paint, while the rich scent of new leather drifted through the open cabin. Everything looked pristine. Everything looked worthy of a premium contract. Yet beneath the polished surfaces, another story quietly waited. Less than 2 minutes later, Daniel found another inconsistency. Different method, different modification, the same hidden intention. Nobody interrupted him this time. Even the dealership presidents remained silent. Finally, he reached the fourth truck. The room had become so still that the faint electronic confirmation tone from the diagnostic tablet sounded unusually loud. Daniel read the final report, exhaled slowly, and looked toward Evelyn. "They are connected," he said in a voice barely above a conversation. "Not by ownership, not by paperwork, by the same hidden supplier who believed changing records was easier than repairing the truth." The words settled over the room with surprising weight. For different dealerships, for different inspection reports, one invisible trail. And for the first time that afternoon, every confident face in the showroom began searching for someone else to explain what had just been uncovered. The silence that followed seemed heavier than any accusation. Four immaculate trucks stood beneath the afternoon light, each one wearing the appearance of perfection while quietly carrying evidence that their digital histories had been altered in different ways but for the same purpose. Evelyn Brooks slowly walked the length of the showroom floor without saying a word. Her polished heels echoed against the smooth concrete, each step measured, each thought becoming clearer than the last. She had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions, survived economic downturns, and built a company that rewarded honesty above convenience. What stood before her now was not simply a purchasing decision. It was a question of trust. One dealership president finally broke the silence. "With all due respect, these are technical interpretations, not proof of wrongdoing." Another executive quickly joined him. "Software records can be misunderstood, especially by someone who does not know our internal procedures." Daniel Carter remained completely composed. He folded his hands loosely in front of him and spoke with the same calm voice that had unsettled the room from the very beginning. "Then let us remove interpretation from the conversation." Several eyes turned toward him at once. "Every manufacturer assigns encrypted production signatures that cannot be recreated outside approved factory systems," Daniel continued. "Those signatures establish a continuous chain between the vehicle, its software, and every certified repair performed afterward. If your reports are accurate, those signatures will agree with your documentation." One executive answered immediately. "And if they do?" Daniel nodded respectfully. "Then I will apologize for interrupting this meeting, thank everyone for their patience, and quietly leave." His answer surprised the room. There was no threat, no demand, only confidence rooted in truth rather than pride. Evelyn looked toward the dealership representatives. "Will you authorize access to the manufacturer verification server?" The question lingered in the air. None of the executives responded immediately. One glanced toward another. Another adjusted his tie while avoiding eye contact. A third reached for a bottle of water he suddenly seemed to need. Tiny gestures, ordinary gestures. Yet together they revealed something no presentation slide could hide. Daniel noticed them without saying a word. He had spent years studying machines, but experience had taught him that people often revealed themselves even faster. Finally, one representative forced a smile. "Those records are stored through our regional office. It could take several business days." Daniel gently shook his head. "Not anymore." He pointed toward the diagnostic tablet still resting on the technician's card. "The manufacturers introduced live verification after several nationwide fraud investigations. It takes less than 60 seconds. The technician looked at Evelyn. She answered with a simple nod. Within moments, the secure connection opened on the screen. The loading symbol rotated quietly while every person in the showroom stared at the display. The bright afternoon sun slowly shifted across the polished floor, stretching long reflections beneath the waiting trucks. Nobody reached for coffee. Nobody checked a telephone. Even the air seemed strangely still. Then the first verification result appeared. Factory production signature mismatch. The second truck produced the same warning. So did the third. Then the fourth. No dramatic alarm sounded. No flashing lights filled the room. Only 4 simple lines of text, calm and undeniable, carried more weight than every polished sales presentation delivered that morning. Daniel lowered his eyes for a brief moment before looking toward Evelyn. Machines do not hold grudges, he said quietly. They simply remember what people hope everyone else will forget. No one laughed this time. No one argued. And for the first time that afternoon, the confidence in the room belonged entirely to the quiet single father who had never once needed to raise his voice. The secure verification results remained frozen on the screen, simple enough for anyone to read and impossible for anyone to explain away. Nobody rushed to speak because every explanation that had sounded convincing only minutes earlier had quietly fallen apart. Evelyn Brooks stood motionless, her attention fixed on the 4 confirmation messages. She had built her reputation by making difficult decisions with a clear mind instead of emotional reactions. Yet even she understood that this discovery reached far beyond a single purchase order. If these records had been manipulated for her company, how many other businesses had trusted the same polished paperwork without ever looking beneath the surface? One dealership president finally cleared his throat. There must be an administrative error inside the manufacturer's database. Daniel Carter answered with the same steady composure that had guided him from the beginning. Then we should welcome an independent audit. If the database is wrong, your records will protect you. If the database is correct, the audit will protect future customers. No accusation, no raised voice, only quiet logic. The room fell silent again. Evelyn slowly turned toward her chief financial officer. Suspend every purchase document associated with today's meeting. The executive nodded immediately and closed every digital contract waiting for approval. The soft clicks of laptop lids shutting echoed through the showroom like a series of final decisions. One after another, assistants gathered folders that only an hour earlier had represented one of the largest fleet acquisitions in company history. The atmosphere changed completely. Sales presentations disappeared from the large display screens. Promotional videos stopped playing. The excitement that had filled the room was replaced by careful reflection. Daniel walked back toward the first truck and rested his hand lightly against the hood. "This vehicle is not the enemy," he said quietly. Several people looked at him with surprise. Machines do not choose deception. People choose it. A truck can still become reliable when its history is honestly disclosed and properly repaired. Trust works the same way. Evelyn listened carefully. Those words carried the calm wisdom of someone who had learned difficult lessons without becoming bitter. She realized Daniel had never tried to embarrass anyone. He had never celebrated being right. His only purpose had been protecting the truth before a costly mistake became permanent. She stepped beside him and looked across the row of vehicles glowing beneath the late afternoon sun. "How did you notice something that everyone else missed?" Daniel smiled faintly before answering. "Most inspections begin by looking for what should be there. I begin by asking what should not be missing." Evelyn considered that answer for several quiet seconds. It sounded simple, yet explained far more than vehicle diagnostics. It explained leadership, character, and judgment. Behind them, the dealership executives spoke softly among themselves, their confident expressions replaced by concern as telephones quietly appeared in their hands. Some began contacting legal advisors. Others reached out to regional managers. Nobody was thinking about commissions anymore. They were thinking about accountability. The sunlight outside had begun to soften into the warm colors of early evening, casting long golden reflections across the showroom floor. Daniel glanced toward the fading light through the glass wall before checking the time on his old wristwatch. His daughter would be finishing her after-school program soon, and he had promised never to keep her waiting if he could help it. While everyone else stood surrounded by contracts, lawyers, and unanswered questions, the quiet single father was already thinking about the little girl who mattered more to him than every luxury truck in the building combined. Daniel Carter quietly unplugged the diagnostic tablet and handed it back to the technician with the same care someone might use when returning a borrowed family photograph. "Thank you," he said with a warm smile before taking one slow step away from the trucks. There was nothing left for him to prove. The evidence now belonged to everyone in the room. Evelyn Brooks watched him with growing curiosity. Most people who uncovered a mistake of this size would have demanded recognition, a consulting contract, or at least an apology from those who had mocked them. Daniel asked for none of those things. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his worn work shirt, pulled out his old pickup keys, and glanced once more at the time on his watch. "Mr. Carter," Evelyn called gently. He stopped and turned. "Would you stay for just a few more minutes?" Daniel smiled politely. "I can spare a few. My daughter gets out of her after-school program in a little while, and she believes being on time is one way a father keeps his promises." The sentence settled over the room with unexpected warmth. It reminded everyone that behind the quiet confidence stood an ordinary man whose greatest responsibility was waiting several miles away. Evelyn nodded with understanding. "Then I will not waste your time." She paused before asking the question that had been growing in her mind since he first touched the steering wheel. "Where did you learn all of this?" Daniel looked through the showroom windows toward the fading afternoon sunlight before answering. "A long time ago, I helped build systems that were supposed to make fraud more difficult." Several technicians exchanged surprised looks. One whispered, "For which company?" Daniel hesitated for only a second. "For the manufacturer that designed the verification architecture you just used." Every head turned toward him. Even the dealership executives seemed genuinely stunned. Evelyn studied his face carefully. "You helped design the system that exposed these records?" Daniel gave a modest nod. "I worked on a small engineering team. Hundreds of talented people contributed. I was fortunate to be one of them." There was no pride in his voice, only gratitude. One young technician stepped forward, unable to hide his curiosity. "If you were part of something that important, why are you not still there?" Daniel's expression softened. He looked down briefly before answering. "Life changes people." He lifted his eyes again, calm but thoughtful. "After my wife passed away, my daughter needed a father more than the industry needed another engineer. Promotions, conferences, and long flights across the country no longer seemed as important as reading bedtime stories and making breakfast before school." Nobody interrupted him. The bright showroom suddenly felt quieter than before, as if every polished surface reflected not expensive vehicles, but the quiet dignity of a man who had chosen family over prestige. Daniel continued in the same peaceful voice. "Skills can always be used again later. Childhood cannot." Evelyn lowered her eyes for a brief moment. She had sacrificed birthdays, holidays, and countless evenings while building her company. Listening to Daniel, she wondered how many precious moments success had quietly asked her to trade away. Outside, the golden light stretched across the parking lot as the day slowly approached evening. Inside, the expensive suits, impressive titles, and polished presentations no longer seemed like the most remarkable things in the building. The quiet single father, standing beside the row of trucks, had revealed something far more valuable than altered software records. Without ever intending to, he had reminded everyone that true success was measured not only by what a person built for the world, but also by the promises they kept for the people waiting at home. Daniel Carter slipped his truck keys back into his pocket and offered a courteous nod to everyone in the showroom. "I should get going," he said quietly. "My daughter has been patient enough today." Before he could take another step, Evelyn Brooks spoke again. "Please wait." Her voice carried none of the authority that had commanded boardrooms for years. Instead, it carried something far more uncommon: respect. She walked toward him until only a few feet separated them. The executives, technicians, and dealership representatives instinctively gave them space, sensing that the conversation had become about something much larger than trucks or contracts. Evelyn looked directly into Daniel's eyes. "I owe you an apology." The room became perfectly still. She continued without hesitation. "When you first spoke, I assumed you were interrupting a meeting you did not understand. I gave you 3 minutes because my instincts told me to listen, not because I believed you were right. I was wrong." Daniel smiled gently. Listening was enough. Most people never get that far. Evelyn lowered her head for a brief moment before looking back up. "You protected my company from making an expensive mistake. More importantly, you protected our employees, our drivers, and every customer who depends on us. That deserves more than a simple thank you. She reached in her leather portfolio and removed a business card bearing only her direct telephone number. I would like to offer you a position as my senior fleet integrity advisor. Full authority, full compensation. You would answer directly to me. Several executives looked at Daniel with expressions of genuine surprise. It was the kind of offer experienced professionals spent entire careers hoping to receive. Daniel accepted the card with both hands, studying it quietly before slipping it into his shirt pocket. He did not answer immediately. Through the towering glass walls, the evening sun painted the parking lot in soft shades of amber, and the long reflections across the showroom floor seemed calmer now, almost peaceful after the tension of the afternoon. Finally, Daniel spoke. It is an incredibly generous offer. Evelyn waited patiently. But my answer today has to be no. A few quiet gasps spread across the room. Daniel smiled before anyone could misunderstand. Not because I do not respect your company. Quite the opposite. My daughter has a science fair next month, piano lessons every Thursday, and she still believes I can fix almost anything in the world. I cannot promise your company the time it deserves unless I know I can keep that promise without breaking the ones I already made to her. Nobody laughed. Nobody questioned his decision. Evelyn looked at him for several thoughtful seconds before a warm smile slowly appeared. Then let me ask a different question. Daniel raised an eyebrow with quiet curiosity. Would you consider helping us as an independent advisor on your own schedule? Daniel thought about it for a moment. That would allow me to keep my promises at home. Evelyn extended her hand. Then we will build the schedule around the father before we build it around the engineer. Daniel shook her hand with quiet gratitude. It was not the handshake of a billionaire and a forgotten mechanic. It was the handshake of two people who had finally recognized the value of character. As the last golden light of the day settled across the showroom, everyone present understood that the greatest agreement reached that afternoon had never required a contract. It had been built on honesty, humility, and the quiet dignity of a man who never allowed success to become more important than the little girl waiting for him at home. Daniel Carter left the showroom just as the evening sky settled into soft shades of gold and deep blue. His old pickup truck started with the familiar sound he had known for years, and for the first time that day, complete silence surrounded him. There were no executives asking questions, no presentations glowing across giant screens, and no contracts waiting for signatures. There was only the quiet road leading toward the small elementary school, where one little girl believed her father could always be counted on. 20 minutes later, Emily Carter spotted the pickup pulling into the parking lot. Her face lit up with the effortless joy that only children seem to carry without reservation. She hurried toward the passenger door with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "You are right on time," she said proudly as she climbed inside. Daniel smiled. "I promised." Emily buckled her seatbelt before pulling a folded sheet of construction paper from her backpack. "I made something for you." He carefully unfolded it at the next red light. Across the page, she had written in bright markers, "My dad fixes problems nobody else can see." Beneath the words was a drawing of the two of them standing beside his old pickup truck beneath a huge smiling sun. Daniel felt his eyes grow warm, not because of what she had written, but because she believed it with all her heart. "This is beautiful," he whispered. "I'm going to keep it forever." They stopped at a neighborhood ice cream shop, just as they often did on Fridays. Emily happily chose chocolate while Daniel ordered vanilla. As they sat beside the front window, a television mounted above the counter quietly reported breaking business news. Several nationwide investigations have been opened into vehicle record irregularities involving multiple dealerships across the region. Corporate purchasing practices were expected to change as manufacturers introduced additional verification standards. The customers inside the shop listened for a few moments before returning to their own conversations. Daniel glanced at the screen only briefly before turning back to his daughter. Emily tilted her head. "Was that the place you visited today?" Daniel smiled gently. "Yes." "Did you fix their trucks?" she asked with innocent curiosity. Daniel thought for a moment before answering. "No, sweetheart. He looked out the window where the last rays of sunlight reflected across the hood of his old pickup. The trucks can be repaired. What really needed fixing was the truth. Emily nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. Children often understand honesty more quickly than adults because they have not yet learned how easy it is to hide behind appearances. Several weeks later, Evelyn Brooks announced a new nationwide purchasing policy requiring independent digital verification for every fleet vehicle her company would ever buy. She also quietly welcomed Daniel as an independent advisor, honoring every scheduling promise that allowed him to remain the father his daughter needed first. Their professional respect became the foundation of a lasting friendship built not on wealth or status, but on shared values. Those who had laughed that afternoon eventually learned a lesson no training seminar could ever teach. Titles may open doors. Money may command attention. But quiet dignity earns something far more valuable. It earns trust. And sometimes the strongest voice in any room belongs to the person who never feels the need to raise it. As the evening settled peacefully over the little town, Daniel folded Emily's drawing and placed it safely inside the glove compartment of his old truck. Of every document he had seen that day, it was the only one that reminded him what success truly looked like.